Welcome to the 700 Club. The IDF's expanded operations in Gaza are forcing Hamas to negotiate. There were reports the terror group has agreed to a ceasefire very similar to a U.S. proposal offered weeks ago.
Israeli officials have yet to respond. They say their military offensive is putting the pressure on Hamas. Paul Petit reports from Jerusalem.
Hamas says it has agreed to the latest ceasefire hostage proposal as talks in the Middle East pick up steam. The IDF chief of staff is calling it a, quote, turning point in the war. But Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be taking a wait-and-see approach as the IDF continues its plans for the takeover of Gaza City.
I spoke with the defense minister and the IDF about our plans regarding Gaza City and the completion of our missions. And like you, I hear the reports in the media, and from them you can be impressed by one thing: Hamas is under immense pressure.
The Qatari Prime Minister met with Hamas and Egyptian mediators on a proposal that would include a 60-day truce, the release of 10 living Israeli hostages in exchange for the release of 200 Palestinian prisoners, the return of all remaining dead Israeli hostages in exchange for 10 Palestinian bodies, the temporary halt of an IDF offensive, and the formulation of a committee to govern Gaza.
Hamas, for the first time, after weeks of not being willing to discuss any deal to release hostages, even though Turkey had already approached it and Qatar had already approached it, suddenly it is on the table. The reason is clear and we see it now in discussion. Only their fear that we seriously intend to occupy Gaza. Facing this alternative, they are willing to discuss.
The new ceasefire plan is very similar to U.S. Envoy Steve Witkoff's proposal that fell apart earlier this summer. While Prime Minister Netanyahu is said to be considering the plan, earlier this week the PM's office announced Israel will only accept a deal that sees all hostages released at one time. President Trump shares Netanyahu's skepticism. He took to Truth Social, posting, "We will only see the return of the remaining hostages when Hamas is confronted and destroyed. The sooner this takes place, the better the chance of success will be." While Hamas is under pressure from world leaders, Netanyahu is facing pressure at home. Another massive protest in Tel Aviv calling for the end of the war in Gaza is scheduled for this weekend. In Jerusalem, Paul Petit, CBN News.
Well, this is definitely a time to stay strong, and I encourage Israel, you cannot have a future in Gaza with Hamas still in charge. The offer of negotiation is piecemeal. They're only offering to return 10 of the hostages. They want Palestinian prisoners, those who have already been convicted of terror crimes in Israel, to be released. It's not a sincere offer, in my view. They cannot negotiate, and they can't come ever to peace with Israel because of their own ideology. They want to wipe Israel off the map. They've said it again and again and again. They can't stay true to what they think is the truth and what the reason Hamas exists. They can't ever come to peace with Israel. So Israel's forced here, and let's all recognize it. And let's stand with Israel in this battle, because this is a battle that's far bigger than Gaza. This is a battle that will Islam stop the ideology of every place on the planet has to come under Sharia law. That's their avowed goal. And whether you look at all of the attacks that have happened right here in the United States, the attacks that have happened in Europe, and especially the attacks that have happened in Israel, underneath that is a belief that Sharia law needs to be the law of the land. And until Sharia law is established, they're going to have jihad. They're going to have war against the infidels. Who are the infidels? You and me. In other news, President Trump is working to broker a face-to-face meeting between Ukraine's President Zelensky and Russia's Vladimir Putin. John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. The president also hopes for a trilateral meeting in the near future. He made the announcement Monday afternoon after an intense day of meetings with President Zelensky and a number of European leaders. CBN's Wendy Griffith reports.
A display of unity at the White House Monday as world leaders gathered to show their support for Ukraine's security in the pursuit of a peace deal. Arriving at the White House, President Zelensky received a warm welcome from President Trump, who appeared pleased the leader was wearing a suit and not his usual army green. Inside, the two men were cordial, unlike the heated exchange 6 months ago.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts. Personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you.
Crucial for Zelensky, security guarantees in case Russia invades again.
What security guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
We're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long term. This is very long term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again.
Although Putin opposes Ukraine joining NATO, Trump's team claims the Russian leader is open to allies agreeing to defend Ukraine.
When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
CBN's George Thomas says it could be similar to how the U.S. stationed troops in South Korea in the 1950s.
And we have today about 28,000 U.S. troops based in South Korea as a strategic against the North Koreans. What Zelensky wants is something similar that would prevent the Russians from taking any more land from Ukraine.
Russia officials, however, have already begun pushing back on the idea of an armed force inside Ukraine. While President Trump backed away from his earlier calls for a ceasefire, European leaders sought to change his mind. President Emmanuel Macron of France.
To ask for a truce or a ceasefire, at least to stop the killings, as we discussed, is a necessity. And we all support this idea.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that and let's try to put pressure on Russia.
Trump playing both sides.
I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Wendy. Now to the massive hurricane that's set to begin making its way up the East Coast. Aaron is a Category 3 storm just off the Bahamas with winds up to around 130 miles an hour. Forecasters say it will not make a direct hit on the United States. They predict dangerous rip currents and flooded roads with waves up to 15 feet in North Carolina's Outer Banks. Evacuations are already underway in that area. Tropical storm watches are now in effect for coastal North Carolina and parts of Virginia. Officials reported at least 75 rip current rescues off the southern coast of North Carolina Monday. Wrightsville Beach has issued a no-swim advisory for the rest of the week. While high waves and rain cause coastal erosion, which is common in North Carolina's Outer Banks. However, scientists say it's accelerating, with some areas losing more than 10 feet of shoreline annually. As CBN's Brody Carter reports, that's creating a risk for coastal communities.
Homes like these here along the Outer Banks in North Carolina are just one strong storm from being swept into the ocean. Now, as peak storm season approaches, researchers tell me sands are shifting and erosion could create big problems along the entire Atlantic coast.
With the erosion that's taking place, with higher waters, with storm waters and more rain, you're seeing the collision of how climate is changing and the impacts in a coastal community.
The Outer Banks is an iconic string of barrier islands known for their beauty and seclusion. As seasons change, the Atlantic can churn with greater energy, with winds often reaching hurricane strength. East Carolina University's Reed Corbett, executive director of the Coastal Studies Institute, says that change is cutting into parts of the coastline at alarming rates.
You know, the average erosion rate for the ocean front isn't that high. It's 2, 3, 5 feet per year. But there's these hot spots that are 10, 15 feet per year.
The U.S. is home to the world's most barrier islands, with more than 400 scattered among 30 coastal states. Along the mid-Atlantic coastline, federal records show more than 2/3 of the area eroding.
First of all, there hasn't been any beach at all to lay on.
Sarah Beth Rice and her family regularly vacations here, but with the significant retreating of the sand, she sees changes that are hard to ignore.
This is our 4th year vacationing on this island, and
it's never been this great.
Not sure that we're gonna come back again next year. Unfortunately, we might look a little bit further up just to see.
In just 2024, the ocean washed away at least 7 houses along the Outer Banks, leaving behind debris and pollution. The latest North Carolina Science Panel report projects sea level to rise at least a foot here by 2050, with high tide flooding expected to happen multiple times a year. For the majority of coastal homes with septic tanks, that rise also means groundwater will push waste back up, creating a mess for which few are prepared.
But it's a reality. We are not going to be able to maintain the shoreline in every location. So that's one thing. Another thing is, as sea level rises, groundwater tables are going to rise. And this is sort of a hidden problem, right? Out of sight, out of mind. And that really is dealing with wastewater. It's not just the water table. At some point, you won't be able to flush your toilet. That is a real issue.
Millions are spent each year up and down the coast for replenishing sand and building dunes to buy time. It's expensive and unfortunately only temporary. Amid all of this, federal funding has been cut for key field research points like the Coastal Institute. For communities built on shifting sand, the question for residents is not whether the shoreline will change. It's how can they learn to live with it.
I'm going to get asked about predictions for the future. Are the Outer Banks going to disappear? Sure. One day. Is it going to be in my lifetime, my kids' lifetime? No. Is it going to change? Certainly.
Reporting in the Outer Banks, North Carolina, Brody Carter, CBN News.
Beautiful area, but very sobering report. Gordon?
Well, there's a reason they call it the Barrier Islands. And for centuries, the Barrier Islands weren't inhabited. I mean, you might have some fishing shack or a hunting shack down there, but for it to be turned into these coastal communities and resort communities, you know, I understand the economics of it, but the weather patterns are quite clear. And the reason in North Carolina they're called the Barrier Islands is they're the point of contact for hurricanes coming up the Atlantic coast. I lived in Norfolk for a while in a place called Willoughby Spit. That entire piece of land was created by a hurricane. The force of it was so great that the sand from the bay was piled up at the northern part of the city of Norfolk and became whole new territory for the city. The Knott's Island and that whole area, it used to be called False Cape because there was a direct entry to the Atlantic Ocean, but a hurricane came and blocked it up. So these things aren't new, and in times past, people didn't build there precisely because it was so changeable. And that's why we have this wonderful parable in the New Testament. Build your house on a rock. Don't build it on the sand.